In the chapters, the opening chapters, chapters 2 and chapters 3 of the book of Revelation, John writes letters to the 7 churches, or 7 of the early churches in the Christian era in Asia Minor, which of course is modern-day Turkey. And each letter, each of those 7 letters follows a general pattern of commendation, complaint, and a correction. And then, at the end of each of those letters, there is a promise. And you can read through the 7 promises there of the 7 churches. But the point that I guess I'm wanting to make, as you can see by the highlighted yellow, is that each of them is encouraged to overcome. There is a promise given to the one who overcomes, or as some translations say, the one who is victorious. Now, I guess the implication of that is that in this Christian pilgrimage, in this Christian faith walk that we have, we are encouraged to overcome. In other words, we on the faith pilgrimage will face difficulties. Keith mentioned some of those in his prayer with us. Some things are easy to overcome, but some things are not easy to overcome. I guess old age, Keith, is not easy to overcome. And, well, the alternative I don't like anyway, so I would rather grow old. But the implication is, to the early church, you will face difficulties. You will face hardship. There will be obstacles in your life. And the risen Christ is encouraging us not to give up, but to keep faithful and to press on and to overcome. Whether the early church as in Revelation or us today, it is still the same. And so he says to the early church, even in that short period of time, this first 100 years of Christianity, he is saying to his fellow believers, or Christ is saying to his followers, you have persevered, you have endured, you have been afflicted, you have been in poverty. You see, life is not always smooth. And, just we're all of a similar age. It wasn't very long in life before we discovered hardships. And the longer we live, we realize those hardships do not stop. They keep coming. So today I want to share a few thoughts with you on overcoming obstacles to breakthrough. What do we do when we face the brick wall, when things seem pretty tough and there's no way through? How do we overcome to break through? You see, if we're going to finish strong in our discipleship pilgrimage, we have to be overcomers. Let me tell you 2 stories. One is mythical truth. In other words, it's a make-believe story, but there's truth in it. The other is factual. 2 men got shipwrecked on an island. One started screaming and yelling, we're going to die, we're going to die. There's no food here, there's no water. The second man leaned up against a palm tree as calm as ever. And it drove the first man crazy, seeing the second one just leaning against a palm tree. And he said to him, don't you understand? We're going to die. And the second man replied and said, oh, you don't understand. I make $100,000 a week. Well, that drove the first man even more crazy, and he asked, what difference does that make? We're shipwrecked on an island with no food and no water. We're going to die. And the second man answered and said, you don't get it. I make $100,000 and I tithe on my $100,000 to the church. My pastor will find me. Well, you might be saying, I don't make $100,000 a week, and neither do I. But the reality is, I've been on the island many times, and so have you. You've been on that shipwrecked island, and you know what it feels like to be in a place where there doesn't seem to be any hope. There doesn't seem to be a way forward. There doesn't seem to be a solution. There doesn't seem to be an answer. You don't even know where to look. And yet, we're here. You and I are here. We've survived 100% of our worst days so far. We've made it through this far. Second story. A month ago, my brother-in-law set out on a regular bike ride. He does a lot of bike riding, and every week he's out on his bike. And this was a bike ride he had done many, many times before. He's an excellent and experienced rider. He was only about 400, maybe 500 meters from his home, going down a small incline. I think he must have been going reasonably fast down the small incline because he hit something. And he went over the handlebars and he landed on his head. And the fall broke his neck. And he lay there paralyzed. Thankfully, one of the first people to arrive saw it happen was a doctor who began to make sure that people didn't move him so that he wasn't more badly injured. But the reality is he was totally paralyzed and couldn't breathe. He had to be put on a ventilator. And eventually, as they did the tests and analysis, unfortunately, the injuries to his neck were so severe that he didn't survive. The injuries could not sustain life. For us, we're back on the shipwrecked island as we struggle with tragedy, as we face, something unexpected. And that's an obstacle you don't overcome quickly. We have all those questions. Why? Why do these things happen? What if? What if he had gone a bit slower? What if? They're normal questions in a time of grief. My brother-in-law had only retired at the end of last year. He had a big bucket list of things he was working through that he wanted to do. 2 days after we had his funeral, 2 days after we had had his funeral, he and his wife were booked to travel to Europe and have an overseas holiday. Of course, all those plans had to be cancelled. For all of us, life is not always smooth sailing. Problems, sadness. It's amazing how often we find ourselves using words like unfair, unlucky, frustrating, unfortunate, annoying, inconvenient. There's a lot of words like that in our language. You see, most of us from a very young age, even little toddlers, I look at my little 2-year-old granddaughter, all kids, all of us from a very young age seem to have an innate desire or an innate expectation for fairness and justice. It's not fair, is the cry of the little kids. He got 2, I got 1, they got more than me. I mean, it's just endless, what the young kids say. But as we grow older, we know we have to learn to live with the hand we've been dealt with. We've got to learn to live with the hand we've been dealt with and make the best of it and overcome if we're going to be faithful in this pilgrimage, this faith walk. But it's not easy. I, like you, have probably shed many tears over many things in my life. Like you, I will have had anxious nights when I've just lain awake, wondering, questioning what it's all about. A secret to long and faithful discipleship is learning to be an overcomer, that if all it hinders and hurts us, because, you see, pain in life is inevitable. Pain in life is inevitable, but misery is optional. There is a way to go from pieces to peace in the shipwrecked island times of our life. I found that through good times and the not so good times, God has still been with me. God's always been with me, even when I doubted, even when I've questioned. I've also found that problems and tough times can sometimes bring me closer to God rather than further away. And I've found also that those tough times sometimes show me that I've got resources within that I didn't know existed. It was the tough time that brought out the shipwrecked island experience, that brought out something within that I would never have discovered any other way. So today I want to look with you quickly again at, well, I don't know how quickly, but I'm going to look at you with that story of Elisha that Garth read to us from 2 Kings 4. If you were here in St Andrews, let me think, it would have been about 20 years ago, certainly back in about 2001. I remember I preached a sermon on 2 Kings 4 back in 2001. If you remember that far back, you're very good. You get 2 gold bars if you can remember that far back. But over the years, I have learned that, as I said, in my faith walk, hold on to God, even against the odds. Press into God even when it seems nonsense. And keep faithful even when others are giving up. That's how we learn to be an overcomer. So let's look at 2 Kings 4. 2 Kings 4 is telling the story of one of the shipwrecked island experiences of life. This is a poor widow, and she's in trouble. She's in incredible trouble. She's desperate. She has no solution. She sees no way forward. As it says, she's at the point of losing her 2 sons. In those days, in that context, if you couldn't pay a debt, the creditor could come and take your children. She's got no way of paying the debt. She's going to lose her 2 boys. Now, what's significant to me in this story is that her husband is a prophet. Or he was. Her husband was a prophet. He was a man who had devoted his life to God. He had revered God. He had sacrificed for God. And clearly he was very generous with all that he had. Maybe he was too generous because he's left his wife in debt, in a state of poverty. Just because we are Christians does not mean we won't face problems. The second point that's worth noting there, just a little word, his creditor. The woman is in problem. The woman is on a shipwrecked island. The woman is experiencing a situation in life that she was not responsible for. She didn't bring it about. It was her husband. You could have said she was maybe innocent in the situation. But it doesn't stop the problem coming or the hardship coming. She suffers because of what someone else did. She did nothing to end up on the shipwrecked island of despair, we assume. Bad things happen to good people. Many times the problems we face in life are not necessarily our doing. I guess that's not part of an unusual part of the story, the suffering part, because we know about that. What I think is significant in this story is how she overcomes, and they are the points that I want to look at. The first thing is that I would say if we're going to overcome, again, a very obvious one, but pray. Call to God. Ask God to help us in our time of trouble. So she calls out to God. She doesn't look away from God in anger or disgust, because that often is what we do. When things go wrong, we get angry. Quite naturally, that's a natural human response. But anger doesn't solve problems. It often makes them worse. I would say this widow had every right to be angry with God. Her husband was a prophet. He had served God. This family had followed God. But if you want to see a breakthrough, I believe prayer will be a key. And so she calls out to God, or calls out to his prophet, Elisha. So pray for breakthrough. The second thing that we need to do is ask the right questions. When we're on the shipwrecked island, ask the right questions. You see, when things go wrong, it's easy to focus on the pain. It's easy to focus on the hurt. It's easy to focus on the problem, and that's natural and normal. But in the process, we put the focus on the barrier rather than the breakthrough. And part of the secret of making a breakthrough is to ask the right questions and lift the focus off the problem. It is far more important to look at the root of the problem than at the problem itself. The problem we see is far more often a symptom than a cause. And so to get breakthrough, we need to find the cause and deal with that. And Elijah says, how can I help you? What do you have? He asks questions. I wonder how you, and I know myself, how do we, when we are dealing with or seeing other people with problems, what do we do? You see, there are many other things that Elisha could have done. Things that we often do when trying to help people in trouble. He could have given her comforting words. He could have offered her words of solace. He could have offered her words of hope. He could have just shown empathy to her, which is a good thing to do. No problem with that. He could have, and I would suggest should have, but he didn't. I think he could have gone around the company of the prophets with the little basket that Catherine's got there and says, let's take up an offering. Give a little page. He could have preached a message like preachers often do. He could have taken her to the law of Moses that teaches that even though your sons are going to be taken, they're going to be well cared for, and once the debt is paid, you can have your sons back again. He could have preached a message to her. But he didn't. To do so would have been to focus on the problem. Rather, he asked, what do you have? And rather than solve the problem independently of the woman, he focused on her and forced her to find a solution. And I guess that's the next thing. The third thing is focus on what you have, not on what you don't have. You know, so often in life when we do face problems, the question, the thing that goes through our mind, if only I had, I could deal with. If only my son or my daughter would. If only, if only are two very destructive words. Because that attitude doesn't lead to breakthrough in faith, it leads to despair and doubt. But any one of us who is a grandparent, and I guess some of us here will be grandparents, you can give your grandkids an outing. And you can take them and think you're going to spoil them for the day, and you take them to McDonald's, you take them to the movies, you buy them sweets, you buy them ice creams, you finish at the swimming pool or mini putt or whatever. And you say to them as you're taking them back home, "Did you enjoy your day?" "Oh, yes, but I wish I had KFC, or I wish I had pizza." There seems to be something in our human nature that focuses on what we don't have or what we didn't get, rather than what we've missed out on, rather than what we have. And many of us as adults are very little in our grandchildren. So Elisha says to her, tell me, what do you got? What do you have in your house? She replies, I got nothing. Except a small jar of oil. It's all we've got left. No food, no water, nothing. Just a jar of oil. Okay. Focus on what we have. Take what you've got. Use it and see what God will do. So God asks us to look at what we have, be grateful for it, and then use it with Him. He doesn't ask us to look at what we don't have. He brings the increase. I don't know what problems you may be facing in your life, and some of those problems won't be easy to overcome. As I've said, I'm working through one of those at the moment. All problems don't have easy solutions, and all problems are not easily overcome. But I'm pretty sure that, like the rest of us, you could be thinking, if only I had, but rather, what does God got? Offer that to Him. Take it, use it, and then miracles occur. Do you remember when Jesus wanted to feed the 5,000, the story that Garth read to us from Mark 5? He said to the disciples, look, these people are hungry, feed them. Jesus, we can't do that. This would take 8 months of a man's wages. We haven't got that much. They focused on what they don't have. So Jesus said, okay, what have you got? Go round, have a look, find what you've got. And Andrew comes back and says, I found a boy with 5 loaves and 2 fish, but what's that for so many people? And Jesus says, yes, focus on what we have. And the disciples say, are you crazy, Jesus? 5,000 men plus women plus children, 5 loaves, 2 fish. I've often pondered that story. I love that story. And I've often wondered, when did the miracle happen? When did the bread multiply? When did the fish multiply? Was it when Jesus prayed? Or was it when the disciples started ripping off the bread and giving it out? I don't know. I've no idea. I like to think it was when the disciples actually put their faith into practice and started distributing that the multiplication took place, but I have no idea. Quickly speed up. The 4th point that leads to breakthrough is obedience. Go and ask your neighbours for empty jars. Ask for heaps of them. Elisha said, go outside, borrow vessels from all your neighbours, empty vessels, and not just a few. Now, the woman had to obey no matter how foolish or ridiculous this proposal seemed. She could have complained to Elisha, you're going to make me look a fool in front of my neighbours. You're going to ask me to go around, ask all my neighbours for pots, for vessels, for things. But she obeyed and she broke through. She had a part in overcoming her problem. While she, of course, depended on others for help, she still had to take the step of faith herself. She had to take the critical part of taking the little jar of oil and start pouring it into the big jar. Jar after jar after jar. And it was only as she saw that the oil finished that it stopped flowing. You see, a small point but significant point to note too, in that helping us to break through into faith is that God doesn't always make a show of it or intend us to make a show of it. The instruction was close the door, go into private. You don't have to make a big show of something to experience a miracle. And then the 5th one, be expansive. The oil only stops flowing when she runs out of jars. when the vessels were full, she said to her son, "Bring me another vessel. This is great, son. This is fantastic. Another one, another one, another one." And the son says, "Mum, I've got no more. We've run out." And the oil stops flowing. The implication is if that she or her boys had gathered more jars, she would have had more oil to sell. Our faith is often smaller than God's promises. He often gives us more than we ask. And lastly, the woman is instructed to fulfill requirements to others before thinking of herself and her problem. Before she makes provision of herself and her children, she must first pay her husband's debtors. Breaking through problems in life is not always easy, but let me just offer you 6 little principles, I guess. They're more of a guideline, an idea of what we must do. And then, just a couple of one-liners to finish with. Not every day is good, but there's something good in every day. A pessimist makes difficulties of their opportunities, and an optimist makes opportunities of their difficulties. What I know of fear is that it has cost me far more than bravery ever has. The enemy may hide in wolves in sheep's clothing, but God hides lions inside of lambs. Father, we thank you for your wonderful word, and we thank you how you seek to help us in our daily walk and our daily pilgrimage. Lord, we do pray for all who are going through difficulties, all who may find themselves on a shipwrecked island at this time. Amen.